Hey everyone, my name is Kevin, and I am cringe. Yeah, I know, you probably had no idea since I'm so normal-seeming and cool and sexy, honestly. But yes, it's true. I, Kevin, the owner of this channel, have done and been into some pretty cringy things in my life. I was one of the founding members of my high school's anime club. I was in a competitive math league when I was in middle school. I was really, and I mean really, into magic until a socially concerning age. One time in high school, I found out how to send mass emails to the school's network and subsequently sent every single person in the building the entire script to the 2007 film The Bee Movie. I make YouTube videos. Suffice it to say, I've had my fair share of embarrassing moments, and so I think I know a thing or two about the subject of cringe. I know how it feels to both witness it and to be it, how it feels on both sides of that dynamic. And I'm sure most of the people watching this do too. Cringe is one of those things that's really hard to understand from a philosophical perspective. Everyone has experienced being cringy and embarrassing before, and pretty much everyone agrees that it sucks. But we also love watching others go through the same thing, getting enjoyment from someone else going through something we know to be extremely uncomfortable. And so in today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into just that, asking what cringe is, how it materializes, how it affects our social dynamics, and the psychological and sociological outcomes of that. And to illustrate this, we're going to be using an example of a time when online cringe culture was taken to its psychological extreme, manifested in one of the most bizarre and malevolent ways I have frankly ever seen online. Today, we're going to be talking about Sorbet. So a while back, there was a huge controversy happening on TikTok surrounding a California-based idol group by the name of Sorbet. Now, if you aren't aware, in Japanese pop culture, an idol group is a group of usually young women that are entertainers. They usually sing and dance or have some other skill that is showcased and widely commercialized. And Sorbet consisted of 3 members, Alice, Barry, and Ash. And it's important to note here that this group, while being American, was obviously inspired by J-pop idol culture. That is the portion of Japanese pop culture that has cultivated the idol phenomenon. And to promote their group, Sorbet started posting videos on TikTok before they even had music out, before their debut, before anything. They were in their promotional pre-debut era, so to speak. And then one day in May of 2023, they uploaded this video, which is them showcasing their call-in responses.
1, 2, so sweet! Hello, we are Sorbet! We are an idol group based in California, and today we wanted to teach you guys our call-in responses!
Hello, I'm Alice, and I am the green member of Sorbet, and my emoji is a little 4-leaf clover, and I like to bring luck to all of my fans. So for my call-in response, I sort of incorporate that. It's pretty simple. Basically, I'm just gonna go lucky, lucky, and then all together go Alice. Ready? Lucky, lucky, Alice! Thank you!
Hello everyone, my name is Barry, and I'm the leader and pink member of Sorbet. So I'm going to teach you my call-in response. So I start out by saying, strawberry, and then you repeat back, blueberry. And when I ask, who's everyone's sweet idol, you're going to say, Betty-chan. Are you ready? Strawberry, blueberry, みんなの甘いアイドルは Betty-chan. Hi, Betty desu.
I'm the red member of Sorbet, and I'm going to teach you guys my call and response. So mine is based off my Oshimart, which is the red dragon Mahjong tile. And a quick history lesson, my call and response includes 2 moves from Mahjong, Pon and Kan. Pon is a 3 of a kind, which represents Sorbet as a trio, and then Kan is a 4 of a kind, which represents Sorbet, and as well as you guys. So mine's pretty long, but bear with me. It's going to go clap, clap, Pon, pon, clap, clap, Kan, kan, clap, clap, and then I'm going to call Tsumo, which is a winning move in Mahjong, and then I'm going to go, it's my victory. All right, ready? 1, 2, clap, clap, pon, pon, kan, kan, Tsumo, watashi no kachi. Thank you guys.
So This video went insanely viral, and pretty much overnight, the group was at the center of honestly one of the most heated and fast-paced cancellations I've ever seen. And if you're like me, you might be thinking, what were they canceled for? That video didn't really seem problematic. It kind of just looks like some girls having fun online. What gives? Well, you see, the main point of controversy surrounding Sorbet mainly has to do with the group's leader, Berry. Berry was criticized extremely heavily for her use of Japanese in her call and response, with her critics claiming that her use of a fake and stereotypical Japanese accent was appropriation of Japanese culture, as she is a non-Japanese white person.
Overseas idol group Sorbet is being cancelled for cultural appropriation, primarily because of one of the members' usage of a fake Japanese accent.
These accusations opened up an entire Pandora's box of other accusations, which typically happens when there's fresh meat to be canceled online. And before we knew it, Berry Chan had been accused of everything from Asian fetishizing to Asian fishing to editing her eyes in promotional photos, and even of some serious stuff like sexual harassment. And I really don't want to go so deep into this lore to where it starts to become a drama recap video. That's not what this video is, so I'll put it like this. What started as, to be fair, a bit of a cringy video, if you're not familiar with that culture, snowballed into a tsunami of hate that escalated further and further until the members of Sorbet were doxxed and put in physical danger. It's kind of one of those situations where, like, you kind of had to be there, but to put it simply, this controversy escalated so quickly and to such an extreme that the group was doxxed, harassed, threatened, and was forced to disband. They introduced themselves, got canceled, posted an apology video, got canceled even more, and ultimately disbanded, ending their career even before debuting or releasing any original material at all. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as the internet. Scandals that shouldn't even be scandals, being taken to such an extreme that it's almost unclear what the actual core issue is. So now your question might be, Kevin, since this all happened so long ago, why are you talking about it now? Isn't this old news? Well, no, because as of just a few days ago, as I'm writing this video, Berry Chan has made another video in which she debunks basically every allegation that was made against her in the original drama.
This is me talking about it, breaking my silence, if you will. I am sick of being called an Asian fetishizer, an Asian fisher, and so much other nonsense. I don't know how this person got those messages in the first place, because those screenshots came from the private Discord of the maid cafe that I used to be in. But I would like everyone to know that I have my own screenshots that I took before I left the Discord. Everything in these accusatory screenshots are either completely untrue or are being taken so far out of context that they're being twisted to make me look like this gross, horrible person.
And like I said, I don't want this to be like a drama recap video, so I'm not going to go into the specific details of the video that she made. I'll put a link in the description to all the videos I mentioned, but what's important to understand about this video are two things. One is that Berry's recent video, at least to my standards, successfully clears her name of a lot of the allegations that were thrown her way. It kind of showed that, like, these allegations were less so based on truth and more so based on a social desire or incentive to call out problematic behavior. And two, this video is responsible for the single biggest switch up I have ever seen online. 10 months ago, when this drama initially happened, the comment sections on both Sorbet's account and Berry's personal account were almost entirely negative. I would know. I was there. It was hard to find even a single comment on either of the pages. But now, it's the complete opposite. Ever since Berry posted her recent video, the consensus seems to be that she was innocently attacked for things she didn't do and received way too much hate that she didn't deserve. Every comment on her page now is something along the lines of, I never understood the hate for Sorbet, or people were overreacting, or you didn't deserve all that hate, etc., etc. It seems as though all the hate on Sorbet had somehow vanished into thin air and been replaced by overwhelming support. Even some of the hate videos from back when it initially happened now have comments supporting Berry. The internet has essentially done a complete 180 on this person after so mercilessly tearing into her for weeks or even months straight to such an extreme degree. I really have never seen anything like it. It almost makes you think that maybe there never was anything valid to the criticism of Berry and Sorbet, and that maybe a large chunk of the internet just saw people dunking on a cringy video and joined in. Because that's exactly what happened, obviously. And so the question becomes, now that we know that what happened to Berry and Sorbet was largely due to speculation, how did it get to the point that it got to? How does a hate campaign based on fake outrage reach such an extreme level? And why do people feel the need to fabricate hate on innocent people when there are perfectly good actual pieces of shit to be focusing our energy on? So I want to state up front that I don't believe that anyone involved in the hate campaign against Sorbet was being deliberately dishonest. I do believe that for the most part, the people criticizing them did believe what they were saying and were doing so out of what they considered to be respect for the minority groups harmed by the call and response video. That being said, I think it's well established that, at least in the court of public opinion, many of the claims being made about Sorbet and Berry were either entirely fabricated or, at the very least, extremely weak and not really worth getting up in arms about. But if that's the case, what was all the hate based on? How can a group of people both be honest and spreading misinfo? What incentives were there to participate in all of this hate if the criticism themselves weren't really all that true? What's going on there? So most of the issues that people had with the original call and response video from Sorbet came from the fact that a lot of the parts of the video just felt off. Like, the Japanese accent she puts on feels kind of weird and has a bit of a yikesy vibe, if you don't know that it's not an accent and that she's actually speaking Japanese. Strawberry and blueberry are Japanese. They're loan words. It's not an accent. Similarly, the cutesy kind of idol vibe she has comes across as weird in the same vein, if you don't understand first that that type of acting is standard, not only in J-pop idol groups, but in Western and American ones as well. You see, most of the criticism of Berry and Sorbet that I have seen comes from people who are not a part of or do not partake in the consumption of idol culture. Most of the callouts of Sorbet come from people who have no knowledge of the established and widely popular trends in both Japanese and American media that Sorbet is mimicking here. American idol groups, while being a product of Japanese culture, are, to my knowledge, both extremely popular and widely accepted by Japanese fans. There's even a term to describe these overseas idol groups called Kaigai idols, who basically have the same exact shtick and performance style as a Japanese group, except are just located elsewhere in the world. And shockingly, many of these groups mimic trends and styles set by J-pop idol groups, including the incorporation of the Japanese language into performances. So if you take a look at Sorbet and compare them to any other idol group in America, what did Sorbet do to get canceled that every other American idol group didn't do? And unfortunately, I think the difference between Sorbet and every other American idol group is that Sorbet committed the mortal sin of being cringy on main. They unintentionally brought idol culture, a culture which is often misunderstood and labeled as cringy by outsiders, into a space where an atypical amount of outsiders could see them and criticize it. Unlike most idol groups, the TikTok algorithm for some reason chose to boost Sorbet's content, making it leave their bubble where that culture is normalized and find a place among people who don't get it and find it cringy. And that is where I think the center of this controversy comes from. I don't think it's a genuine care for minorities harmed by a white person speaking Japanese. I think the wave of hate sent in Sorbet's direction is best described as people mistaking something that's cringy and that made them uncomfortable for something that's problematic. Appropriating that feeling of judgment we get from seeing something cringy and using progressive language to justify it. It can be tempting sometimes to have a knee-jerk reaction to something that you don't fully understand, and to rationalize that reaction as a morally justified criticism of that thing. Taking that feeling of cringe and using it as a justification for your cancellation attempt. But to better understand where this feeling comes from, how people respond to it, and how it's used to garner hate campaigns like the ones we've seen here, we need to more deeply understand what is cringe. So I'm sure most of you watching are familiar with the concept of cringe, especially as it exists online. It's this genre of content where you watch someone going through something really embarrassing or uncomfortable for your own amusement. Taking something that, if it happened to us, would be extremely difficult and traumatizing, and taking pleasure in it happening to others. Cringe is one of the pillars of the internet, with videos of people doing cringy things existing online as long as video itself has. People love to cringe. It's one of the most popular subreddits. There are entire channels and communities dedicated to compiling clips of it. It's basically unavoidable online. And it has quite the range as well, with cringe content encompassing anything from laughing at awkward social situations to reacting to certain problematic behavior, and even to witnessing significant political blunders of major world leaders.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
But as widespread as all of that stuff is, it all shares a common, seemingly self-contradictory thread, which is somehow being amused and entertained by consistently uncomfortable and painful situations, taking pleasure in watching bad things unfold. But why is that? Why do we find enjoyment in suffering, comedy in pain, entertainment in distress? Well, to properly answer that, I think we need to fully understand and come to terms with what we mean when we say cringe. While it is more common online to witness the cringe of other people, it's still something that everyone has personally experienced. Everyone has that one cringy memory burned into their brain that seems to always remind you it's still there, whether it be that embarrassing thing you did in middle school, or that one awkward thing you said to your crush that one time, or that one time you called your teacher mom and the whole class laughed at you. But when we have those experiences, those moments of cringe, what is it that we're actually experiencing? What is it about those moments that's so potently mortifying that makes us look back on them in horror, sometimes even decades later? Well, it's important to understand that something that is cringe is not necessarily just something that's weird or abnormal or uncouth. Cringe is a social dynamic, a reflection of the forces at play in any given interaction between people. I can do weird, embarrassing shit by myself in the comfort of my own home, and often do, and that stuff isn't cringe. But if I did those same things in front of a group of people, all of a sudden we get that feeling of cringe. And that is because I have redefined those actions with social context. I am now part of a social dynamic that is being disrupted by my actions. And it seems as though what makes an action cringy or not is determined solely by whether or not the action was perceived and how it was perceived, suggesting that cringe is something that is socially decided rather than innate to any certain actions. The YouTube channel Psych2Go actually has a really interesting video on cringe where they touch on this idea.
The social evaluation model developed by psychology professor Roland S. Miller has a theory about why we might feel this way. According to this model, we evaluate ourselves and others based on social comparison, meaning we compare ourselves to others to figure out our own social standing. The embarrassment comes from feeling like we've been evaluated negatively by others. This can happen when we are the center of negative attention, or when we feel like we've made a mistake or done something socially unacceptable.
So essentially, according to this model, when we feel cringe, it's a reflection of our shame and embarrassment following a failure to meet social standards and expectations. Our cringy actions can sometimes feel like we've been socially demoted as we use our social interactions to compare ourselves to others to determine where we sit on that scale of social grace. Being cringy is like getting an F on your social report card and is why it feels so mortifying. But this dynamic creates really interesting results if we stop and think about it, because the thing that causes cringiness to be so humiliating when it happens to us is the same thing that causes joy when we see it happen to others. Because when it happens to us, we feel judged. We feel, as the video said, negatively evaluated by others. But when it happens to someone else, we're placed on the other side of that social dynamic. Instead of feeling judged and negatively evaluated, we get to do the judging and the evaluating. We get to place ourselves socially above that person that is doing the cringe. But okay, we make a social judgment about others and we cringe at them. Sure. But how does something go from a judgment within a social context to a full-on hate campaign? How are our feelings of judgment caused by this cringy feeling taken to that extreme? In 2009, there was a paper published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, which explored the relationship between disgust and purity and how the resulting dynamic affects our moral perception and judgment. Across 3 studies, the researchers measured this disgust-purity relationship via what they refer to as the appraisal tendency framework, wherein the emotion of disgust is defined as an appraisal of purity. In other words, disgust is the emotional response we have upon appraising something, judging something as impure or contaminated. The researchers posit that moral judgment is an extension of and is influenced by emotion, in this case, disgust. When we are disgusted by something, we deem it as impure, contaminated, or otherwise harmful to us, which we attach to our sense of morality. However elicited, disgust motivates people to reject anything perceived as likely to contaminate the self, physically or spiritually, or to threaten their status as civilized human beings. In this way, disgust signals the badness of impurity, and by extension, the goodness of purity. The point of these studies was to assess how emotion can affect our moral judgment, and how specifically the emotion of disgust can amplify our moral condemnations along the axis of purity. To see whether or not participants exposed to the emotion of disgust would have stronger moral condemnations of impure acts. What they did was take the participants of the study and induce the emotion of disgust in them by making them watch gross video clips, and then ask them to make moral assessments about some given actions. And what they found was that, yes, the experience of disgust related to or caused higher moral evaluations of purity behaviors. That is to say, inducing the emotion of disgust correlated with more severe moral judgments about impurity. And if you think about it, cringe is just a form of disgust, or at the very least, it's a form of judgment that we make about others. If we see something and think, that's cringe, what we are essentially saying is that that thing caused a negative emotional reaction within us, one that, as we discussed earlier, is a reflection of our own social standing. In the same way that seeing something disgusting may trigger a judgment of impurity, seeing something cringy may trigger a social judgment, and just as with disgust and purity, may feed into how we perceive that thing morally. Similar to how the emotion of disgust has an impact on how severely we morally judge impure acts, the emotion of cringe may also have an impact on the degree to which we morally judge social ineptitude. And I think we can apply the findings of this research to the case of Sorbet. When we pointed out earlier that the hate for the group was not based on much, we also exposed a seeming contradiction, which is, if the claims were so unfounded, then why was the vitriol so intense? Why was the moral condemnation so solid until it wasn't? Again, the disgust-purity relationship establishes how our emotions can affect our moral judgments. The stronger our emotional response is to something, the more severe our moral judgments about it become. And the emotional response we get from seeing something cringy is a result of our appraisal of that thing being outside social norms, which is itself a moral judgment. And that emotional response, the cringe, amplifies our moral condemnation of that thing, even if there isn't much about that thing that is overtly immoral. And I think this is evidenced by the severity and scale of the hate against Sorbet. Emotion, in this case, serves as a mechanism by which we can enhance or even entirely manufacture moral outrage. The cringe is too strong, so it must be wrong. And so when our moral judgments are amplified, or depending on how you look at it, compromised by our emotions, what is the end result of that? How does this relationship between emotion and morality manifest in society, and what is it used to accomplish? So for me, when talking about major hate campaigns designed to destroy someone for acting even slightly out of line, it comes across to me as a reflection of our innate and sometimes covert desire to maintain power dynamics that we personally benefit from. I think it's human nature to want to get rid of power structures that hurt us and keep ones that benefit us, and this also applies to social power structures. As cringe enthusiasts, we naturally want to place a distinction between us and the thing that makes us cringe, not just because we want to separate that thing and us, but also because that social dynamic affords us, as the perceivers of the cringe, the power to act upon that thing as we please. When something is cringe, it creates a strong negative reaction within us that signals to us that we have power over that thing, which manifests in many different ways. And what you see happening a lot online is, like we said before, those feelings manifesting as outrage. The thing is so cringy that we cannot help but be outraged against it, because cringe, in its essence, is once again a violation of social norms, something to be outraged against. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of cringe online, when it was like at its peak popularity, the main thing that comes to mind are those SJW cringe compilation videos that plagued YouTube a while back. And for those of you who weren't chronically online from like 2015 to 2019, SJW cringe compilations were videos that basically just showcased really embarrassing or over-the-top moments from progressive activists, mostly women, that framed through the conservative narrative of these videos came across as cringe. A lot of it is just misogyny, just taking pleasure in women being embarrassed for arguing for their own rights.
If we're going to talk about violence, we're going to talk about the fact that I watched a girl's arms be physically twisted behind her at this event today.
That's a bummer.
The people who make these videos don't actually care about the arguments being made by the people in them. They just like humiliating people and getting clips that show how cringe the feminists and the left are.
Is a list of the things that we're working towards. Now, if you would shut the fuck up for the 50th billionth time.
But framing these people as cringe actually accomplishes a lot if you think about it. If you can establish your political opponents as cringe, that kind of serves to discredit them and affirm your own beliefs, to assure yourself that your politics are the correct ones, because people who are correct can't also be cringe, right? I say all this just to illustrate the point that we made earlier, that cringe is something that is socially determined, based entirely on the worldview and biases of those who perceive it. I, as a leftist who agrees with the core arguments of a lot of the feminists and progressives featured in these videos, can still see, though granted these examples are cherry-picked to paint a narrative, that these people are acting overly emotional, or saying things that don't really make sense, or getting caught in epic rhetorical traps, things that someone who agrees with the premise of these videos would consider to be cringe. Yet, despite me recognizing the aspects of these videos that makes them quote-unquote cringy, I'm not particularly struck with the feeling of satisfaction and catharsis that comes with watching these videos, because I have nothing to gain from watching them. It's not my worldview being affirmed by these videos. It's not my politics being represented here, and so the video's not impactful for me. And I think that shows what the real social mechanic of cringe is. When we point and laugh at someone, we're not just saying something about them, we're also saying something about us. Gosh, I'm glad I'm not that person, or gosh, I knew it, I'm actually better than that person. And so by consuming the SJW cringe compilation, the viewer is both socially demoting their opposition and positioning themselves above them, affirming that they are correct, quelling any anxiety about whether or not their politics are true. And by doing this, they provide themselves with the moral and emotional ammunition necessary for an attack on whoever they view to be an SJW. It's one of the key reasons that those SJW cringe videos are one of the vital aspects of the alt-right pipeline. The cringe helps legitimize their desire to take action against the feminists or the progressives or just women in general by removing shame from themselves and projecting it onto others. And so how does that apply to the case of Sorbet? What was it about their, let's be real, kind of cringy video that caused such negative backlash? Well, I'm sure you're shocked to learn that it's not just the right that uses shame and embarrassment as a mechanism to affirm their own politics. So-called progressives have done and still do the same exact thing. In the case of Sorbet and their call and response video, we see a knee-jerk, cringe reaction to that video transform into a campaign to cancel the group seemingly overnight. The cringe manifests as a pseudo-progressive moral outrage, an outrage that must necessarily be righteous. There must be something morally wrong with it, right? It must be racist or xenophobic or otherwise problematic, or else it wouldn't make me feel this way. And when you've accepted that as true, then it's inevitable that you'll go looking for, or in some cases, even invent aspects of the thing to make those feelings true, to justify them. It not only allows you to say that this thing is cringy, but also that this thing is bad and wrong. And by virtue signaling that this thing is bad and wrong, it allows us to place ourselves in a position of moral superiority to the thing, to craft a power dynamic between us and it that only exists in our heads. Because remember, this sense of moral superiority that we have constructed is false. It was formed not by intellectually assessing whether or not this thing may or may not be harmful, but by post hoc justifying the extreme knee-jerk negative emotional reaction we had to it upon seeing it. It is reactionary in nature, blurring the lines between social justice and just plain bullying, allowing us to simultaneously feel morally superior to the thing while also giving us an excuse, a moral license to take out our frustrations against that thing. This is the reason that so often the original offender, the cringy, if you will, receives infinitely more harm in return than they ever contributed to the world by nature of being cringy. You see it over and over online. Someone is a bit cringy, maybe even a little offensive, sure, and within 24 hours they are doxxed, harassed, threatened, and in some cases stalked or even physically harmed. A sentence that far outweighs any potential harm that their actions could have caused. And the reason that this reaction is so disproportionate is because of that dynamic, that moral license that allows us to view the cringy person as a villain, someone who we are against, someone who we, as the morally superior ones, must use our power to stop. You see, so far, this video has been about cringe and the effects that cringe can have in a broader social context. The ways that cringe can affect our perception of morality and enable certain behaviors that we otherwise wouldn't engage in. But there's a deeper concept underneath all of this, isn't there? A concept that not only applies to cringe and internet culture, but to broader sociological domains, politics, economics, interpersonal relationships, class, war. All of these things, along with cringe, share the same psychological foundation. You might even call it the real subject of this video. Otherization is a philosophical term that refers to the differentiation between individuals or groups on the basis of social identity. It is the mechanism by which people differentiate between themselves, serving as the psychological basis for all in-group, out-group dynamics, the us versus them mentality. Those who share our values, our customs, or our beliefs are part of the in-group identity, and those who do not, those who are socially distinct from us, form the out-group identity, the other. And if this concept sounds familiar to you, it's probably because this psychological framing of different groups has been historically used for some pretty bad stuff. Because in order to form an in-group identity, we need to establish clear and explicit boundaries between us and them, defining not only who we are, but who we are not, and who they are. And in so doing, we form somewhat of a hierarchy, a cultural hegemony that subjugates the other. Since in-group mentality is so heavily determined by shared identity and values, otherization serves as a way to place yourself or your group morally above another, creating a power dynamic that has historically led to marginalization and subjugation of certain outgroups. It is the psychological foundation for things like racism, xenophobia, fascism, imperialism, colonialism. In fact, one of the most recognized writers on cultural hegemony was 20th century philosopher Antonio Gramsci, who coined the term subaltern to describe the social class of people subjected to imperial colonialism. The term subaltern refers not to a group of people that are oppressed within a given social hierarchy or cultural hegemony, but those who are excluded from that hegemony entirely. The subaltern is not the bottom tier of the pyramid. It's not in the pyramid at all. It's a label that refers to an outgroup that are explicitly prevented from participating in society, being barred from civil life and all of the political agency that comes with that. For example, the most common application of this term is used to describe the role of indigenous people within an imperial colony. One can label these groups as subaltern due to the fact that since their land and resources had been stolen and reappropriated to white people, they were essentially excluded from political participation in colonial civilization, being forced through violence and other means to the margins of society. And so this is just one of the many examples of the fact that otherization, the forming of an in-group, out-group dynamic, is not just the formation of borders between one set of people and another, drawing a distinction between groups. No. It is a form of social ostracization. The very purpose of these dynamics is to uphold and facilitate power imbalances, whether they be social, political, or even global. And the people subjected to them are the underclass, the lower stratum of society, the subaltern, and are somehow simultaneously vital to and separate from the cultural hierarchy. This sociological phenomenon, the practice of separating ourselves into groups in order to maintain and perpetuate power imbalances and subjugation, is one that has a historical through line to the beginning of humanity itself. Clearly defining ourselves as the in-group and those people as the out-group is something that we've been doing, well, forever, and is actually one of the key ways that societies develop. From tribal territorial disputes of early humans to nations built on the backs of slave labor to the very formation of the borders between our countries, we rely on the concept of the other to maintain what we have and to justify the pursuit of attaining more of it. Whether it be a presidential administration justifying a military invasion at the expense of the third world to maintain our hegemony in the Middle East, or forming distinctions along the lines of class, race, gender, and sexuality to preserve systems of discrimination, otherization serves as the tool of injustice, the vehicle of fear, and the rationale for all forms of marginalization, including social marginalization. I started this video by talking about a TikTok idol group's video, and how that video led to the people in it being socially maligned and ostracized from their own communities, all for committing the mortal sin of being cringy online. What that group experienced, the harassment, the multiple doxings, the threats, the stalking, all of it, was all a form of social marginalization. Something that has taken place countless times on the internet, and sometimes rightfully so, but I can't help but feel that in cases like this, where the outrage seems to be more or less entirely manufactured, the widespread criticisms, the huge displays of indignation, what many would call cancel culture, are more of a showcase of the flaws of the human pathology than any legitimate criticism on the behalf of Japanese people. Earlier, we said that by designating some person or group as the other, that we maintain and uphold something about ourselves as the in-group. That placing boundaries between people serves not just to separate us, but to justify and uphold some underlying imbalance between groups and moralize dominance over others. And I think we see that on full display here. By quote-unquote canceling people who are cringe, we otherize them. We make them explicitly distinct from us. And we use that distinction to affirm our sense of righteousness, to satiate our desire to cast out that with which we do not identify, to dominate that which we deem to be the other. By simply drawing the moral distinction between us and it, we legitimize our own superiority over it. But these distinctions aren't real. In fact, none are. Man and woman, white and non-white, country A and country B, your sports team and mine, cringe and not cringe. None of these distinctions exist in nature. They're all projections of how we as fallible humans perceive the world, and our brains need to categorize everything we interact with. But the categorizations we do make are, at the end of the day, arbitrary. They're made up. There is no objective quality of the universe that makes one person man and another woman, one person American and another Irish, one person cringe and another not. These are all socially determined categories that we made up. But I'll tell you what is real, is the outcomes of those distinctions. The way we categorize people and draw boundaries between groups may all be made up and socially constructed, but how we choose to draw those boundaries has real-world effects that definitely aren't. I think when we think of cringe as it exists online, we tend to create an archetype of what that means in our head. Maybe they like anime or a certain video game, or maybe they dress a certain way or have a rolly backpack and run in the halls between classes, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, cringe is not specific to any one type of person, because everyone at some point in their life has been cringy, and everyone will be cringy again in the future. When I was a teenager, I used to be really into watching cringe videos, like on Reddit and YouTube and stuff. Nothing explicitly like political or confirming of my personal biases or anything, but just certain videos I found funny and entertaining because I got something out of watching it, an emotional and psychological catharsis that is hard to put into words if you've never experienced it yourself. I took pleasure in watching people in their worst moments embarrass themselves, because it felt like by watching that and laughing at it, by placing myself above it, that I was absolving myself of my own cringiness in the past. That by pointing and laughing at someone that reminded me of my past self, that it meant that I had grown from that and that I was no longer cringe. But that's not true. You can't grow out of being cringe. You can only grow out of an identity that you now perceive as cringe. I mean, that's kind of what growing up is, right? A constant feedback loop of cringing at your younger self, growing from it into a new self that will later also be cringed at by future you. There is never a point where you aren't cringy, even if it's only to some version of yourself that doesn't exist yet, because your present self and identity will eventually be your past self and identity, which inevitably comes with that cringy, I can't believe I used to be like that feeling. What I'm trying to say is that cringe is unavoidable and constant in life because change is unavoidable and constant. When we change, when our identity takes a new form, it's only natural that we feel some kind of contempt or embarrassment towards our former self, the cringe. It is a universal human experience. In fact, a large reason that cringe content is so popular is because it's relatable. Everyone has experienced being cringy in their life at some point or another, yet we choose to look down on those whose experiences are documented and uploaded to the internet. In the same way we feel contempt for our past selves, we also feel contempt for those who remind us of that, who mimic the same behaviors that we feel we've grown past. The internet is a weird place. It's kind of like this game we play where each week there's a new main character for all of us to laugh and throw tomatoes at as we revel in the worst week of their life, all while the rest of us try at all costs to avoid being that person next week. It's an environment where everyone is simultaneously desperate for attention and terrified of it, where everything everyone says must be so thoroughly irony-poisoned and caked in so many layers of cool detachment so as to avoid truly being perceived or being seen as cringe. Where being cold, distant, or indifferent signal that you're one of the cool ones, and where being sincere, authentic, and genuine are vulnerabilities that make you a target. But that indifference that's so incentivized online isn't really indifference, it's the opposite. If all your effort goes into painstakingly making extra sure you come off as cool and detached, are you really that? No. Because you're not. You're afraid of how you're perceived, of how people would respond to the real you, if that even exists. And maybe that's it. Maybe the contempt we feel for cringy people is just an acknowledgement that they're less fearful than us, that they have the courage to appear authentically and sincerely in a space where that behavior is so discouraged. Maybe we're just jealous that they have the freedom to do what we only wish we could, which is to be our true and authentic selves, no matter what people on the internet say about it. You know, it's true what I said about my younger self. I was a pretty cringy kid growing up. I mean, I'm still cringy. I'm literally making a YouTube video right now, but it was much worse back then, just objectively speaking. And the strange thing about it is, you know, even though I can remember more and more cringy moments the further back in my memory I go, I also remember being a lot happier. And like, yeah, no shit, I was a kid. Everyone was happier as a kid, but maybe that's because we weren't yet conditioned to think that certain behaviors, even though they harm no one and bring us joy, are bad and that we should be embarrassed of them. Maybe there's a certain happiness or inner peace that comes with ridding yourself of that, giving yourself the freedom to live authentically and be whoever you want. Or you just get harassed, doxxed, and canceled. Fuck. Did I fuck up the video? Shit. Hey, thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. That really means a lot. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give the video a like and hit subscribe and click the bell thing, I think. It really helps out the channel, so thank you in advance. But thank you so much for watching. There should be another video somewhere for you to click on if you want to watch more videos. But other than that, thank you so much, and bye.